The White House press briefing room buzzed with an electric hum on that crisp March morning in 2025. The cherry blossoms outside were just beginning to bloom, but inside, a different kind of storm was brewing. Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in history, stood behind the podium, her sharp blue eyes scanning the sea of reporters. At 27, she'd already made a name for herself as a fearless defender of President Donald Trump's agenda, her quick wit and unflinching resolve earning her both admiration and scorn. Today, though, was no ordinary briefing. The cameras were rolling, the stakes were sky-high, and the guest in the room was none other than Representative Ilhan Omar, the fiery congresswoman from Minnesota's 5th District. Omar had been invited, or rather summoned, after weeks of escalating tension. It started with a series of X-posts where she accused the Trump administration of weaponizing democracy with its latest executive orders on immigration and AI dominance. Trump, never one to back down, fired back with a late-night post. Ilhan Omar should focus on her district instead of spreading lies about me. Maybe she'd like to debate my press secretary live? She won't last 5 minutes. The internet exploded. Hashtags like #Leavitt vs. Omar and #Trump Challenge trended for days, and the networks couldn't resist. Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC all clamored to host, but Trump insisted it happen on his turf, the White House briefing room, unfiltered and unscripted. Now here they were. Leavitt adjusted her notes, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, exuding a calm that belied the fireworks to come. Omar sat to her left, arms crossed, her signature hijab a bold splash of color against the room's muted tones. The congresswoman's dark eyes glinted with defiance. She'd faced worse than this, she thought. She'd clashed with Pelosi, survived smear campaigns, and built a loyal base with her unapologetic progressive stance. What could a press secretary, even one as sharp as Leavitt, do to her? The room fell silent as Leavitt tapped the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Today's briefing is a little different. Representative Omar has made some bold claims about this administration, and President Trump believes the American people deserve to hear the truth straight from the source. So, Congresswoman, the floor is yours. Tell us why you think we're destroying democracy." Omar stood, smoothing her jacket, and stepped to a second podium hastily set up for the occasion. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every nuance. "Thank you, Ms. Leavitt," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I'm here because this administration's policies, like the mass deportation plan and the gutting of government oversight, are an attack on the values America claims to hold dear. You're not protecting democracy, you're dismantling it, piece by piece, to appease a billionaire elite." The reporters scribbled furiously. Leavitt didn't flinch. She'd expected this. Omar's knack for grand statements was well known. But Karoline wasn't here to play defense. She'd spent the last 48 hours digging through Omar's record, her speeches, her votes, even her old ex-posts. She'd consulted with Trump himself, who'd grinned and said, "Give him hell, Karoline." Now she leaned forward, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "Congresswoman," Leavitt said, "that's a nice speech. But let's talk facts. You say we're attacking democracy? Let's start with your own district and the mess you've left there." The room gasped. Omar's eyes narrowed. The battle had begun. The White House briefing room felt like a pressure cooker as Karoline Leavitt's words hung in the air. The reporters leaned forward, pens poised, sensing blood in the water. Ilhan Omar's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. She'd faced tougher crowds than this. Still, Leavitt's opening shot about her district had landed harder than expected. Minneapolis, the beating heart of Minnesota's 5th, was her pride, her battleground. To have it thrown in her face on live TV stung. Leavitt didn't give her a moment to recover. "Let's talk about your backyard, Congresswoman," she said, flipping open a binder with a practiced ease that suggested hours of preparation. "Crime rates in Minneapolis have spiked under your watch, up 17% since you took office, according to the latest FBI stats. Homicides hit a record high in 2024, and your response? You've pushed to defund the police while your constituents beg for safety. How's that working out for democracy?" The room erupted in murmurs. Fox News cameras zoomed in on Omar, whose expression flickered, a mix of anger and calculation. She stepped closer to her podium, gripping its edges. "Ms. Leavitt," she shot back, "you want to cherry-pick numbers? Let's talk root causes, poverty, systemic inequality, things this administration ignores while funneling tax cuts to billionaires like your boss. I fought for my district, not abandoned it." Leavitt's smile didn't waver. She'd anticipated the pivot. "Root causes? Fair enough. But let's look at your solutions. You voted against the Bipartisan Crime Reduction Act last year, legislation that would have put more cops on the streets and funded community programs. Your own mayor, a Democrat, begged you to support it. Instead, you doubled down on rhetoric while businesses in your district boarded up their windows. That's not fighting, Congresswoman. That's failing. The accusation hit like a sledgehammer. Omar's supporters in the room and watching at home bristled, but Leavitt's command of the facts was undeniable. She'd come armed with data, not just talking points, and it showed. Omar adjusted her stance, her voice rising. I reject the premise that more police solve everything. This administration's obsession with law and order optics doesn't address the real issues, unlike my bills for affordable housing and job training, which you've conveniently ignored. Leavitt pounced. Oh, I've seen your bills. Like the Community Resilience Act you co-sponsored? It promised jobs but delivered a $2 billion boondoggle, half of it funneled to nonprofits with ties to your donors, according to a Minneapolis Star-Tribune investigation. Your district got crumbs while your allies got rich. Tell me, Congresswoman, how's that for systemic inequality? The room went dead silent. Omar blinked, caught off guard. The Star-Tribune piece had been a minor scandal buried under election noise, but Leavitt had dredged it up with surgical precision. Reporters scrambled to pull up the article on their phones, whispers rippling through the crowd. Omar recovered quickly, her voice steadying. That's a distortion. Those funds built shelters, created jobs, real help for real people. You're twisting the truth to score cheap points. Cheap points? Leavitt countered, her tone icy. Tell that to the single mom in North Minneapolis who's still waiting for that help while your friends cash checks. I've got the receipts, Congresswoman. Do you? The cameras caught Omar's flinch, a split-second crack in her armor. Leavitt leaned back, satisfied. Round one was hers, and the internet was already lighting up with clips. But Omar wasn't done. She straightened, ready to fire back. The real fight was just beginning. The White House briefing room crackled with tension as Ilhan Omar regained her footing. Karoline Leavitt had landed a brutal blow, painting her as a hypocrite who'd let her district crumble while her allies prospered. The accusation stung, but Omar wasn't about to let a 27-year-old press secretary, Trump's polished mouthpiece, steamroll her on national TV. She clawed her way from a Somali refugee camp to Congress. She knew how to fight. Omar adjusted her hijab, her gaze locking onto Leavitt. You want receipts, Ms. Leavitt? Let's talk about your administration's ledger, she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. While you're digging up old headlines, how about we discuss the Trump deportation plan? Hundreds of thousands of families torn apart, kids left stranded, all to appease a base that cheers cruelty. You call that democracy? I call it a disgrace. The room shifted. Reporters glanced at each other, sensing the momentum swinging. Omar pressed on, her cadence rising. And let's not forget the AI executive order handing unchecked power to tech moguls like Elon Musk, your boss's best buddy. No oversight, no accountability, just a blank check for billionaires to spy on Americans. You're not defending democracy, you're selling it to the highest bidder. Leavitt's eyes narrowed, but her composure held. She'd expected Omar to pivot to policy, it was her comfort zone. The deportation plan was a lightning rod, splitting even Trump's supporters, and the AI order had sparked conspiracy. The White House briefing room crackled with tension as Ilhan Omar regained her footing. Karoline Leavitt had landed a brutal blow, painting her as a hypocrite who'd let her district crumble while her allies prospered. The accusation stung, but Omar wasn't about to let a 27-year-old press secretary, Trump's polished mouthpiece, steamroll her on national TV. She clawed her way from a Somali refugee camp to Congress. She knew how to fight. Omar adjusted her hijab, her gaze locking onto Leavitt. You want receipts, Ms. Leavitt? Let's talk about your administration's ledger, she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. While you're digging up old headlines, how about we discuss the Trump deportation plan? Hundreds of thousands of families torn apart, kids left stranded, all to appease a base that cheers cruelty. You call that democracy? I call it a disgrace. The room shifted. Reporters glanced at each other, sensing the momentum swinging. Omar pressed on, her cadence rising. And let's not forget the AI executive order handing unchecked power to tech moguls like Elon Musk, your boss's best buddy. No oversight, no accountability, just a blank check for billionaires to spy on Americans. You're not defending democracy, you're selling it to the highest bidder. Leavitt's eyes narrowed, but her composure held. She'd expected Omar to pivot to policy, it was her comfort zone. The deportation plan was a lightning rod, splitting even Trump's supporters, and the AI order had sparked conspiracy theories from X to the Sunday talk shows. Omar was playing to her strengths, rallying the progressive base watching at home. Hashtags like #OmarFightsBack were already trending. You want to talk cruelty? Omar continued, her voice steady but laced with indignation. Look at the cages your administration brought back, detention centers overflowing while you cut legal aid for immigrants. I've met those families, Ms. Leavitt. I've seen the tears of parents who don't know if they'll see their kids again. Where were you? Polishing talking points in the West Wing. The accusation landed. A few reporters nodded unconsciously. Omar's knack for humanizing policy was her superpower. Leavitt scribbled a note, her mind racing. She'd prepared for this, but Omar's emotional appeal was hitting harder than anticipated. The room buzzed as cameras panned between the two women, capturing every flicker of expression. Omar wasn't done. And this AI nonsense? You're letting corporations like XAI conveniently tied to your president's inner circle harvest data on every American. No vote, no debate, just a signature from Trump. My district doesn't need more surveillance, it needs jobs, schools, hope. But I guess that doesn't matter when you're too busy kissing the ring. The jab at Trump drew gasps and a few stifled laughs. Leavitt's lips twitched, she couldn't let that slide. She straightened, her voice cool and measured. Congresswoman, you're good at the sob stories, I'll give you that. But let's not pretend you're some saint of the people. Your district's unemployment is 8% higher than the national average, and your hope hasn't fixed it. As for immigration, those families you're crying for, they're the same ones breaking the law while legal immigrants wait years. You want fairness? Start there. The rebuttal was sharp, surgical. Omar's eyes flashed. She hadn't expected Leavitt to flip the script so fast. The room held its breath, waiting for her response. Round 2 was heating up and neither woman was backing down. The White House briefing room was a battlefield, the air thick with the clash of words and wills. Ilhan Omar had struck back hard, wielding emotion and policy like twin swords, but Karoline Leavitt wasn't fazed. She'd faced down hostile press corps and Twitter mobs. This was her arena. The young press secretary adjusted her stance, her blue eyes glinting with the confidence of someone who'd been underestimated one too many times. She was ready to end this. Congresswoman, Leavitt began, her tone deceptively calm. You love painting this administration as heartless, but let's peel back the curtain on your record. You've spent years railing against corporate greed, yet you took $50,000 in campaign cash from Big Pharma in 2024, companies you've publicly bashed. Explain that to the families in your district who can't afford insulin. The room inhaled sharply. Omar's face froze, her composure cracking for a split second. Leavitt had unearthed a buried headline from the midterms, a donation that Omar's team had downplayed as standard politics. But on live TV, with millions watching, it sounded like a betrayal. Reporters tapped furiously at their screens, pulling up FEC records. X lit up with hashtag Omar hypocrisy trending in minutes. Omar recovered, her voice firm. That money funded outreach voter turnout, not my personal bank account. Twist it all you want, Ms. Leavitt, but my record speaks for itself. I fought for Medicare for all while your president golfs with pharma CEOs. Leavitt pounced. Outreach? Funny how that outreach included luxury fundraisers in D.C. while your district's clinics closed. And Medicare for all? You've had 6 years in Congress, where's the bill that's passed? You're all talk, Congresswoman. Meanwhile, President Trump's renegotiated drug prices down 12% last year, per HHS. Results beat rhetoric every time. The stats hit like a freight train. Omar opened her mouth, but Leavitt wasn't finished. She flipped a page in her binder, her voice rising with precision. Let's keep going. You've called our immigration policy xenophobic, but your own voting record tells a different story. In 2022, you supported a border security amendment tougher than anything we've proposed. Why? Because your district demanded it after a smuggling ring got busted in Minneapolis. You flip-flop when it suits you, then cry foul when we enforce the law consistently. Omar's eyes blazed. That amendment protected my constituents. It wasn't a blank check for mass deportation. You're distorting my stance to dodge accountability. Accountability? Leavitt shot back. Let's talk your Somalia trip in 2023. You met with officials tied to a regime your own State Department flagged for human rights abuses, then dodged questions about it. You want to lecture us on values? Clean your own house first. The room exploded. Reporters shouted questions. Omar's team in the back exchanged panicked glances. The Somalia jab was a deep cut, controversial, divisive, and perfectly timed. Omar leaned forward, furious. That's a lie. I met with community leaders, not dictators. You're smearing me because you've got nothing real to defend. Leavitt smiled, unshaken. The photos say otherwise, Congresswoman. They're on X right now, check for yourself. The American people can decide who's lying. She paused, letting the silence sink in. Anything else? Omar stared, speechless. Leavitt had turned her attacks into ammunition, dismantling her piece by piece. The cameras caught it all, Omar's faltering, Leavitt's triumph. The internet declared it a knockout. But the war wasn't over yet. The White House briefing room was a powder keg detonated. Karoline Leavitt stood behind her podium, a picture of poise, while Ilhan Omar gripped hers, her face a mask of barely contained fury. The press secretary had just delivered a barrage of accusations: Omar's campaign funds, her voting record, that explosive Somalia trip, each one a dagger aimed at the congresswoman's credibility. The room buzzed with chaos as reporters shouted over each other, cameras flashing like strobe lights. On X, #LeavittWins and #OmarDown were neck and neck, the internet fracturing into a digital civil war. Omar took a breath, determined to reclaim the narrative. "Ms. Leavitt," she said, her voice trembling with resolve, "you've thrown every smear you could dig up, but you haven't answered for your administration's failures. Families are suffering, deported, surveilled, priced out of healthcare, while you play gotcha games. The American people see through this circus." The plea landed with a few reporters nodded, scribbling her words. But Leavitt was relentless. She leaned into the mic, her voice cutting through the noise. "Suffering? Let's talk reality, Congresswoman. Your district's median income has dropped 4% since you took office. Bureau of Labor Stats, not my opinion. You've had 6 years to lift them up, but you're too busy grandstanding. This administration's brought jobs, 3 million last year alone. Deportations? We're enforcing laws you've ducked. The circus is yours, step right up." The room roared. Omar's lips parted, but no sound came out. Leavitt had flipped her final salvo, pinning the blame back on her with cold, hard numbers. The congresswoman's team signaled frantically from the sidelines, time to retreat. Omar straightened, forcing a smile. "I'll let the voters decide who's serving them," she said, then stepped away, exiting stage left as the press swarmed. Leavitt didn't gloat. She turned to the reporters, calm as ever. "Questions?" she asked, but the damage was done. The briefing ended minutes later, and the footage hit the airwaves like a tsunami. Fox News hailed Leavitt as Trump's secret weapon. CNN grudgingly admitted she'd dominated the exchange. MSNBC called it a low-blow ambush, but even they couldn't deny the optics. Omar had stumbled, and Leavitt had soared. Back at Mar-a-Lago, President Trump watched the replay, grinning ear to ear. "Karoline's a killer," he told aides, already drafting an X-post. "Omar thought she could take us on, wrong. Leavitt 1, Ilhan 0. Great job, Karoline." The post racked up 1 million likes in hours. In Minneapolis, Omar's staff scrambled to spin the narrative, issuing a statement about right-wing distortions. But the clips, Leavitt's cool precision, Omar's faltering, looped endlessly online, cementing the moment. By nightfall, Leavitt was a household name, her face splashed across every screen. Pundits dubbed it the destruction of Omar, a masterclass in political combat. Omar retreated to her district, vowing to fight another day, but the sting lingered, her base rallied, yet doubters grew louder. For Leavitt, it was a coronation. Trump called her personally, promising a bonus. "You're the future, kid," he said. The cherry blossoms outside bloomed on, indifferent to the chaos. America watched, divided but riveted. In living rooms from coast to coast, one thing was clear: Karoline Leavitt had arrived, and Ilhan Omar wouldn't forget her name.